Hello, hello.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Chris, how you doing today?
Good, good. Posted the slides in Slack. Let me post them to the chat.
Do you want to share them on the screen, Chris, for everybody when we get going?
Sure, we could do that. Okay. Alexis, are you on yet? I don't see him yet.
So you told Todd our rules, right, Chris? Did he do the secret handshake before the meeting?
I did not do the secret handshake.
We didn't do that. Oh my God, no. No mudslinging? Is that it? No.
Yeah.
How you doing, Todd?
Good. How you doing?
Just a little jet lagged in Copenhagen right now.
Jet lag. What's that?
Yeah. It was a good morning though. It's a good morning for us.
Yeah. I went out to the valley for a day yesterday and got in at 2 a.m. So I'm still dragging.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We'll start about 5 past. We'll wait for Alexis. Actually, it looks like Alexis is on, but he's not speaking. Hello, Alexis. Hey, there you are. I don't hear you yet, by the way.
Is that better?
Yep, that's better. Perfect.
Just for the record, Richard called in through POTS because online didn't work.
Okay, no problem. Perfect. I'll steer for you, Richard, when we get to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
I haven't heard the term POTS in a while.
Well,
is that a hint that you're at somebody's age? Is that what you're saying,
I think in California and Colorado they talk about it a lot, but
I think it's a statement of experience and qualifications.
Yeah.
It's not a term in Seattle anymore.
Yeah.
Potholes is a term in Seattle.
All right, see Sam Lambert is on. Okay, that's one more TOC member. I'll give it 2 more minutes. See Camille. Hey, Camille.
Is that Lou Tucker I see on there? Oh my.
Yes, it is. I'm lurking.
Lurker.
Perfect.
It's an open meeting, right?
Where all the cool kids hang out on Tuesday mornings.
Exactly.
Or evenings.
Or local time.
Local time, yeah. Looks like I have Brian Cantrell. You there, Brian?
Yep,
Looks
I'm here.
like you. Awesome. Morning. Alrighty, I got 5 TOC members on, missing Jonathan, Solomon, Brian, and Benjamin, but we have enough people to get started. Hopefully Brian will come on later. All right, Alexis, I'm gonna go kick it off to you. Let me go share my screen. All right, everyone see my screen?
Looks good.
Affirmative.
Awesome, thanks.
Hey, thanks, Chris. I'm just bringing up my slides as well.
No worries. Cool.
Right. Okay. So welcome back, everyone, and thank you today for two guests, Todd, Governing Board Chairman from IBM, and Richard, who's leading the OpenMetrics initiative, who will be guest presenting later. And I believe this is the second meeting with our new Quorum TOC with Sam as the representative of end users. If you missed that last time, then welcome, Sam.
Cool.
Okay, so agenda. Today we will be getting a readout from the governing board as represented by Todd on the TOC principles, operating principles document that was assembled by various people, including myself, Brian Grant, Ken Owens, Chris, Dan, and members of the TOC over really, quite a long time now. And the purpose of this document is to give us a description of the state of the art today in terms of what we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to achieve it, and some details about what that means. So that people who come to the CNCF, either as open source projects or as member companies or as end users, can go, I see what they're trying to do. So it's really an extension and a step forward from where we were with the charter. And I'm hoping that we can get it vetted not only by the TOC, but also the governing board, and agreed and signed and voted by the end of the year. We also have a short presentation from Richard on OpenMetrics, and I think that's kind of it for today. So I believe that we can go straight into slides 7 and 8, which is the operating principles. You can see there on GitHub a link to the current document, which Dan has cleaned up and put onto GitHub. And I think I can just hand straight over to Todd, actually.
Okay. Hey, and thank you all for taking the time to spend with us on this and talk about it. I think one of the things we're trying to do is have more cross interaction, and I'll talk about that more as we go. We want to make sure that if there's needs out there, especially in the the projects, that's getting raised up quickly to the board as well, if there's a resource need in particular, as an example. And there's enough of us now around the table that we can really go and help with those things. But in terms of the principles, we had an offsite with most of the governing board present. Obviously, we've added new members. It was at a point where AWS had joined, Oracle had joined, and Dell had joined, so they were able to be included. Alex was there as well too, and we had a really good session, and we talked about the things that were important to us, the strategy going forward, as well as Alex did a great job of representing you guys with the principles discussion. And I think that all of the board members walked away with that feeling, pretty comfortable, right? We are, if you look at our structure as depicted in this chart, we have the governing board, we have a marketing committee, obviously, because we want to sell the dozen projects or so that we have to the world, because they're great things. And I think the TOC obviously has the direction to go and set where we go with our projects and to pick the right projects. And this document really sets out how to go about doing that from our standpoint. And I think it resonated very well with all of the GB members. So, as cleaned up and as posted, I think that what you guys have done together, along with Dan and others, is really a pretty good piece of work. And of course, we want to see end users, that's the other part of our three-legged stool, now interact and give us feedback and communicate to us, real requirements and their experiences, so that we as a group can learn from that and move forward as we go and pick other projects and work to support the projects that are underneath us. So I think we've got a good structure. We've seen this used in lots of places, and it seems to work pretty well. One of the things that it needs, obviously, is communication among us all, though. So we have, obviously our own charter that's been defined. We've grown to about 20 platinum members now. Boy, I gotta actually look at the list to think about it. So Amazon, Cisco, Core, Dell, Docker, Fujitsu, Google, Huawei, IBM, Intel, Giant, Mesosphere, Microsoft, Oracle, Pivotal, Red Hat, SAP, Samsung, SuperNet, VMware, right? it gets hard to put that list out there now. I think it's pretty impressive that we have so many heavyweights in the industry willing to put money and time into this, and it really, speaks volumes to the work that we've done on the project side of things, right? So, and that project side has obviously been influenced by what you see in the TOC principles document, and I think we're in pretty good shape there. Obviously, we have, as a board now, added in some new developer seats, and we'll have another set of folks, therefore, through the community coming in and giving us suggestions, ideas, being part of the board, helping to make the decisions. So that will help us, obviously, with that end user discussion. So, you okay, Chris? I think you.
Sorry.
That's okay. So obviously, we as a group, are more than just that. So with our member companies, our TOC chair being part of it, it's gotten to be quite a large, unwieldy sort of board. In many ways, when you have boards this large, what you do is you go to a committee structure. So more and more, we're going to be depending on subsets of the board to actually get together, work with the membership, work with you guys as well, to go do, in-depth analysis or help with certain projects or do things like financial reporting and things like that. So that way, the whole board doesn't have to meet and tackle a specific subject. As a group, we'll be, using the membership as best we can to cover all the bases and hopefully do that very effectively. Because a lot of people worry when you see a board this large, will it be effective? And I think the committee structure will help us go and do that. Next slide. Okay. So we did discuss the principles document, as I said, in the July offsite. It was a whole day session with all of us participating and working through that. Alex, obviously, as I said, presented that. I think the most important thing was that we walked away as a group from that discussion, having really good broad consensus that was how we wanted to operate, and that working with the TOC and working with Alex to clean up the doc and talk about the things that were going on at the time. We as the board could get behind that pretty solidly. The document, I think, is in really good shape now in the draft that it's in, and we'll push to get that through at the December 5th meeting and have that ratified by the board. And of course, that's going to be a first time in a little while where we've all been face-to-face again, and so hopefully everybody can be there, and obviously we'll get that through. Again, large board, but I don't think we'll have any issue with that. Okay, next slide. Yeah. So our budget is much bigger with 20 odd platinums. We as a group can afford to do some things now, and that's good. So a lot of the feedback we got from Alexis was, how could we go and help the projects and support them better? Some of the things like, documentation and editors and things like that, the membership can provide. But then, other things, infrastructure and what have you, we can fund and do. So we've got some money now, and hopefully, working together with you guys, we'll continue to bring in really high quality, high caliber projects. But also we can fund and fill the gaps pretty quickly as we need to, because the money is there, and the GB wants to do that. As a governing board, pretty much, the thing that we can do is approve spending, right? We're, as a nonprofit, required to have all of our spending approved through the board, and we're there to just go and do and help that wherever we can, both with resources and dollars, of course. So we're also been working to make sure that we have the projects better supported. We came up with this idea of the service desk and the service dashboard, and Chris, why don't you just flip to the next slide, right? That's up and going now. And hopefully people have looked through it and feel comfortable with it. The idea here is that we'll be much more organized now about how we go and hear the needs of people. And Dan and Chris are really there to help the community. Pretty much anything that the community's been asking for, I've seen that they've gone and just done, right? And we want to continue to foster that and make sure that's what we see from the organization. We don't want any roadblocks in the way of the projects. And this will be the centralized way of going about and doing that. So, we get to the end and you want to talk about that at all. I think that's our first answer. And if there's other things that we need to do, obviously we can come together and talk about that as well too. So the other thing that we as a group need to protect are our trademarks. We've started a conformance program with Kubernetes. It's the first one to really take up the mantle to go and do this. Kubernetes has become pretty important to the world, and having interoperability is something that we as a group value very highly. And therefore, working with the team and the community, we've gone off and helped to sponsor this and make it work. And we'll provide, of course, the infrastructure and whatever it takes to make this a successful project for the community. But obviously, the oversight of what goes into the what is certified Kubernetes is through the technical team and the SIG structure that we've got in place. And that's the way I think we'd like to go and continue that as we go from project to project and work through whether we do a certification program or not. But so far, the feedback has been really good. I think we've seen even a couple of architectural issues get raised and decided on pretty quickly as folks have tried to run the conformance tests. Conformance tests are never enough. You continually work on them. I expect this will be something that goes on for quite a while. And, I think it's something that we'll take very, very seriously as we go about doing this. It's important to police and manage our brands. Transparency. So one of the things we'll do is obviously publish an annual report that says where we are spending our money. As I mentioned earlier in the committee structure, we've now organized a finance committee so that, now that we have a lot of money and we're trying to figure out how to spend it and keep oversight, we'll have a committee that goes and addresses that and is there to make sure that the needs of the projects are being met. We've also added a compensation committee so that we align our executive goals with the strategy that we've been working out, and we'll refresh that on a yearly basis. And then we'd like to have joint governing board and TOC discussions, right? I know Alexis has been working with Dan to organize those so that at the face-to-face, as an example, in Austin here, yay Austin, we can get together and mingle for a while and spend some time talking about what's going on and just make sure we're interacting and have a relationship across the GB and the TOC. So anything you guys need, you know where to go and how to get a hold of us as well too. And then just my door is open. Literally, figuratively, online. Just ping me. If there's anything that you need or questions you have or anything related to how the GB operates or, feedback you want to give us or get something scheduled on an agenda or anything in those matters, I'm happy to go and help and follow up. So that was my little spiel.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So
Would
questions?
anyone have any questions?
Well, hopefully this addressed some of the concerns that we were hearing, and we've addressed some of that. And if there's other private feedback you want to give me as well too, please just send me a note.
Well, let me kick things off with a couple of questions just to get the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. Todd and Chris and Dan, we don't always have representatives of the individual open source projects in the CNCF joining these calls. Mm-hmm. They're probably not aware of all of this in this format. What is your plan for briefing them on this and involving them and getting also, a health check from those projects to tell the TOC how things are going one by one?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak to that a little bit. So I generally have monthly check-ins with most of our projects, so that kind of got a good idea in terms of how they're doing and what their needs are. With us moving to the service desk, hopefully that becomes a little bit easier for them to make requests for us. For the kind of reviews from like a TOC perspective, I'm planning to do formal graduation reviews in one of our meetings in November, where at least some of our projects that are closer to that graduation ready stage will have a more kind of in-depth review. I'm all ears on how to potentially cover the other projects, whether we kind of do an ASF style type thing where projects have to give us a little feedback on how things are going, or they're forced to present to the TOC once a year. I don't know. I'm all ears on how the TOC thinks this should be done.
Could you also mention the survey, please, Chris?
Yeah, we've also surveyed our maintainer community, and we're going to be publishing that hopefully in an upcoming TOC meeting in terms of their satisfaction with our services, on top of things what's working and what's not. So we're planning to do that on a probably 6-month basis, twice a year.
If you have the different projects present, are you going to have criteria that they're expected to meet already laid out so they know what they should be presenting?
Yeah, I'm going to do that. For the graduation one, it's easy. It's you have to meet the graduation criteria that's published on our GitHub, and would probably just ask an update on how the project is doing. So yeah, we could. I'm fair game to make it more templatized. So. Does that answer your question, Alexis?
Yes. Okay. And following up from that, is there a plan do we have a schedule for voting on any of this from the GB side? Do we want to kind of land out at the same time as the face-to-faces at KubeCon? What do we think is the right framework to get this all over the line now?
So I think at this point, to get us over the line, it's, we'll do an email thread, obviously, back to the governing board, but then make sure that we can bring it to a vote in the 12.5 session, so that when we all get together, I think we're going to have dinner after the TOC and have sort of a joint GB TOC dinner. We can mingle and talk about it, but by then I would expect that we'll have it put together and voted on and agreed to.
Okay, and the last question is, do we think that we want to cast the net wider and solicit any more feedback from people in the broader CNCF community and world? Would that be something useful, e.g. on Twitter, to say to people, hey, there is this thing, this is describing what the CNCF is doing. If you're out there in the wider world using this software or just excited about Prometheus or something, please comment. I think that might be a good last thing to do before we can declare victory on the document.
Yeah, I would say something like 30 days before we can publish it out, which means in a couple of weeks we'd put it up and ask for people's comments heading into the GB meeting. That would give us an informed set of comments as well for when we go to actually discuss and vote on it. So I think that's an excellent suggestion.
Chris, would you own that?
Yeah, we could tweet it out, and we could also send it directly to all of our members too, so they get it that way.
That's a great idea.
We'll do both.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions, comments? The floor is open. Well. Then I believe...
You just cut off, Alexis.
Sorry. Then I think we can press on into the next topic. Thank you very much, Todd.
You're welcome.
And I believe we can go straight over to Rich. Are you on the line, Richard?
He was here. Richie, are you still there?
Yes.
Muted? Oh, there he is.
Yeah,
So,
there was... I wasn't sure if it was my turn because there was weird noise on the line. Doesn't matter. So yeah, no worries. Anyone who pre-read the slides, I just added another slide just to make sure, because I realized that maybe not everyone is actually aware of what OpenMetrics is doing or trying to achieve.
Nice.
It's basically an effort to spin out the Prometheus exposition format into its own project. It will change in some regards, but it's basically the same-ish. We do this for two main reasons. A, it's for purely political reasons, because it makes it easier for projects or companies to adopt something when there's not an already established name attached to it, which might or might not be seen as a competitor. Point in case, influx data, which really made a huge decision by actually supporting Prometheus format, even though in theory this would be a different project which tries to grab their revenue or what have you. So that's the one side, just the political stuff. And the other is we really want to try to push a certain kind of thought model into the world for people to realize how to properly, for some value of properly, do metrics and to do monitoring, and to basically even enable people who are not using Prometheus to still use the benefits of the format. In turn, obviously enabling Prometheus to just natively access more data sources, so it's win-win. But these are basically the two main motivations from our side: A, this detaching from an already established name, and B, to get this thought model out into the world. So what we're doing is we have bi-weekly meetings or conference calls where we go through the open issues as we see them. Sometimes this is quick, sometimes this is slower. Partially as a result of that, we met for 2 days last week at Google London and went through everything. By everything, I mean both all the projects and all the companies showed how they currently do their metrics stuff, and also what's around this ecosystem from their point of view. And then based on that, we basically went through the issues. You can see the issues, and you can also see the meeting notes. There's still quite a bit to do, but yeah, that's on the next slide. So anyway, there's a list of projects and companies which attended. You can probably read them more easily than I can read them out, so and you probably have already. So the next slide, that's the first time I actually get the cues for thank you. So basically there were a lot of misunderstandings, because turns out many companies and projects do things differently internally, and so the underlying assumptions tend to be different. And it was a lot easier to iron those out when we were sitting face to face. So there's still a lot of disagreements. None of them are hard blockers, but still they need to be worked out. Basically, we are currently in the phase where we wait for feedback from people who were not on site, to write in their feedback on the discussion and on the meeting notes, so we get also their point of view. And based on that, I'm going to establish rough consensus on all the things which can be closed, and we go from there. I suspect there will be a few topics which will still be open after that, but at least we'll have all the rest hammered out. We already started with speccing a data structure. We do this in Proto. That's actually a next slide if you want to jump. Because we spec the format in Proto just to make it explicit what actually we want to have in there, what is required, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's no requirements in Proto v3, but you know what I mean. But there will be a hard requirement for a text format. Two simple reasons. A, ease of adoption, because what Prometheus exposition format currently does is it makes it really, really, really easy for new people to get their stuff into Prometheus. I've helped a lot of people and a lot of different projects get their stuff into Prometheus, and having a very, very low barrier of entry has always proven to be one of the key factors for getting people into the ecosystem early, and then they realize why this is good. But at first, they just need to be able to start. And the other thing is ease of debugging, because obviously just using curl or your web browser is easier than having to install any tools to do actual debugging or development work. Then there's a point which might be surprising, which is why I marked it in red. Events, the generic term events will become first-class optional, as in it will be designed into the spec. It's not quite sure if this will be the first version of the spec, or if there will be an appendix or a second version, or maybe it's in the first version. That's still not really sure, but the gist is we will have native support for events in the general case. Those obviously split out into logs and traces and all other kinds of stuff, but these are the two most important ones. Obviously, this also touches upon other projects which are within CNCF, and we didn't talk to any of those yet. If you're involved with those, feel free to invite them to talk to us and or tell me who I should talk to other than the obvious ones, because we realized we need this anyway. And for example, when you look at the Google people, they want to have one size fits all. Well, actually, they have to have one size fits all. So they must be able to put everything into one single spec or in one single format. And basically, the plan is if you've got, for example, Prometheus, which only understands metrics, then can simply disregard or not even grab that kind of data and just grab what it understands, and other projects or other software which might understand a different subset or a totally different set might grab different types of data, but it basically all follows one single spec which is defined to work with itself. Yeah. Also, there will be a test suite, and this will probably become the official bar to pass to actually be called compliant to OpenMetrics. Because this takes a lot of the politics and discussions out of stuff, and also it takes out quite a bit of interpretation out of the spec, because there's a reference implementation that either you pass or you don't. And finally, we are still committed to writing an RFC, because with traditional vendors, it's just easier to toss them an RFC in a tender and tell them, okay, you have to support RFC 1, 2, 3, and they go from there. So for the timeline, next slide. The first draft should be ready within November. And that's when we'll toss it out for comment to interested parties. And I suspect that will involve the talk if they want to hear about it. There was the open question about what CNCF can actually do to help OpenMetrics. There's 3 points which we identified. First, once we start the IETF process, one of the things which is invaluable and will help us speed this process up quite a lot is for people who are already involved on the IETF mailing lists to just voice their support. Not just without constraint. Obviously, they need to actually support this, and they need to be able and willing to argue in favor of this and why this makes sense and why it solves an actual problem. But still having this first wave of yes, basically attached to a new ID internet draft, which is what becomes an RFC, just helps us streamline things, because this shows that there's interest within the IETF. Obviously, everyone is free to just voice their opinion, but if there's 100 new people who yell about a new thing, this might be perceived as trying to basically astroturf things. I'd prefer for people to be already involved within IETF. So if you or your member projects or the companies know people within the IETF, now's the time to tell me about this. I know I already made this call once, but did that go anywhere, or?
Not much on my end.
Okay.
Yeah,
so this is something. Okay. So whatever mechanisms you have to, for example, contact your platinum members or all members or whoever, there's a few established names, for example, Cisco and quite a few others who have people who are active within IETF, feeling around and just getting names of people and contact information and telling them, okay, this effort exists, read through it, do you agree, do you disagree, can you support this cause? This would help oil the machine, because IETF can be really quick and really, really slow, and I hope we'll be on the quicker and not the slower side.
Awesome.
The second thing, which is probably even more generic, if there's other projects and companies who could benefit from this, they should be made aware. I'd like to avoid getting into a situation where there's tons of bike shedding and just people heaping on new requirements, and we've got feature creep like no tomorrow. So we need to constrain the total amount of people who voice an opinion in a too early phase to some extent. Yet they should be aware that this is coming. And there's a lot of companies which have similar stuff in-house or just could benefit from this. So low-level pushing out the information that this exists and this will become a thing would also be helpful. And the last thing, we are in the process of deciding on a code of conduct for obvious reasons. What we do not have is any non-males. We have non-white males, but we don't have any non-males. And speaking from experience from other projects, I would hugely prefer to have at least one female or non-male or what have you on the list of people to poke when anything happens with regards to the code of conduct. As we don't have any, and I know you've got females on staff, or also in the TOC and in other places, I would hugely prefer to have a wider scope. So I don't see having code of conduct respondents. I don't think they must be within the project OpenMetrics. I would be more than happy if they are just within the wider CNCF space.
Yep. We could see what to do to help you, even if you're not an official CNCF effort right now. So thanks.
Yeah, we can shelve this as well, or we can just make a note that we plan to do this. I really don't care. Whichever works for you guys works for me.
We'll help you.
Yeah,
no worries.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the last question which I have from my side, is there's an actual need for face-to-face in Houston. I saw that you also had face-to-face or an offsite for the talk. If there's a need, tell me. If there's no need, just as well. And that's it from my side, basically. Austin, Houston? Okay.
No worries.
I okay, maybe I'm confused.
No worries. Any questions for Richie? Alexis?
I have a question. So where did this new requirement come from around events? Because I think you need to be super duper careful to not have scope creep on what is already quite an ambitious project. Merging events, logs, and metrics is, a bit of a moonshot, really, and maybe we can do it better by having different teams working on each one of those. What are your thoughts? And in fact, what are everybody's thoughts?
So from my side, where the original requirement came from, this developed from the face-to-face meeting. Basically, what Google does is they need to attach events to their metrics. Specifically, they have traces which they need to append to specific buckets in their metrics. So they just know I've got, latency X, and this is a trace of something which had a latency of X, or just what have you. So this is basically where this started. And while I agree that putting everything into one huge project to digest this data is quite a different scope from what we have initially. But the upside is we don't have to actually do anything with the data. The only thing which with the OpenMetrics hat on we need to do is to make sure that it fits the same data models. And this is basically where I'm coming from, because as we've seen with the Prometheus format, labels which allow the user to define arbitrary n-dimensional matrices and just slice and dice their data however they need it. That's one of the main powers of what Prometheus and Borgmon and all those things are having or doing. And I'd like to also have this in the event ecosystem. And when you think about it, basically the difference between a metric or a time series and an event in its purest form is basically that the one has its label set and the value, a numeric value. at least in Prometheus world, and it has an optional timestamp, which you can set, or you can just have it as this is the time of whatever happened and then have it implicitly. So an actual event is slightly different. It has basically the same label set. It can even be exactly the same label set. It has a string, and it has to have a time point, or a point in time. So basically, when you look at it in text format, it's almost the same. So most of this is already done. We just need to make sure it fits.
Okay, I mean that sounds like a plan that might not survive further scrutiny. Would anyone else on the call like to comment?
Yeah, I wanted to just add a voice to that. I think it would be really valuable to be able to figure out whether one could decouple those two without losing the benefit of being able to associate events with metrics, but have them able to develop in different and independent directions rather than be tied at the hip.
I don't think it needs to be tied at the hip. The one thing which Google would need, and which is not currently possible with the Prometheus exposition format, is to have the information that this one specific trace ID is linked to that particular bucket in this particular time. So basically what is relatively easy to do is to just define a label set for metrics and a label set for events, and then you cross-relate basically by searching through both those indices. That's relatively easy, but they've got issues with scale, so they want to do basically just toss this information of this specific trace ID is attached to that particular point in time of that time series. And this is currently not possible, so that's the very least which we'll need to accommodate within the OpenMetrics space, because else Google's standpoint is they can't do anything with the whole standard, and they'll simply have to do something else, which would not be the best of outcomes. So this is the minimum which we need. Everything else is basically on top, but definition-wise, standard-wise, I suspect the work is already mostly done, because I don't see it as very, very involved, at least on the format side. For everything else, we'll see where it goes. But as you said, it doesn't need to be in the same thing. It just has to work together really, really well. Except for this trace ID stuff, which needs to come through OpenMetrics, else Google will not support OpenMetrics.
I mean, as long.
Sorry,
we just lost you, Camille.
Camille, you muted yourself.
Piece of the format, then maybe it's okay.
Camille, can you repeat yourself? We lost you.
Camille, you're back on mute.
I'm having a lot of issues with Zoom. Anyway, my point was just briefly that if it's an extension, essentially, so we've got the core of it is really focused on the metrics, and we have the extension, which is, here is the standard that you would use if you wanted to implement events. I think that's, I think that makes sense, especially given that Google has such a strong use case for it. And that's all.
Okay. So could that be generalized to job one, get metrics sorted out and get buy-in from the people who actually need metrics today? Job two, consider what it would take to offer an extension mechanism so that metrics could be associated with other things, regardless of what they are. What does it have to be? Specifically events, because I think what's going to happen in practice is people will suggest a number of different approaches to events due to serverless and logs and what have you, and traces, and we're going to end up if we go down the route that I think Richard was describing, which I'm not sure if he's necessarily completely sure about yet, we can end up, preempting decisions that we get, we have to undo later. So I'm very, very firmly in favor of having things as loosely coupled as possible, and having metrics people do metrics and events people do events and other things, and look at the correlation problem and association problem separately. I don't know if that's even technically possible, but that would be my preference. Also, it would be good to hear from Google about what their thinking is here, since they seem to be driving this use case.
Well, what's driving their use case is pretty simple. At their scale, they don't want to do a correlation of events and metrics after the fact. They want to store the correlation along with the data. Mm. And that's basically it. That's the whole use case. At their scale, even though they really have probably quite some experience with search, they prefer to just store both at the same time. Or this correlation, this hard correlation, instead of a soft correlation, which you have to recreate every time you do an analysis.
Okay.
And again, once you're at the point where you can attach this information of, so basically a trace ID to me is also just an event. And it doesn't matter if it's a full trace or a trace ID or if it's a log line, because as soon as I'm able to put this single event into the format, I basically already have a format which can support everything else. We are not talking about efficiency, blah, 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 but at least in theory, I can put as many events as I want through exactly this mechanism. And people will abuse this, or they'll just shoehorn in their own extension if we don't account for this use case. And then we've got divergence on day one. And we should not have divergence on day one, because then we can just cancel the whole effort.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, I think we've covered the introduction, and yep. Thank you very much, Richard. That was great. So I think I can go back to the slides and yep. Jump ahead to. This was kind of preempted by the previous topic, but we now have a number of different ideas kicking around. Are concerned with metrics, events. Some people have asked about logging, and there are no doubt 3 or 4 other things where I think similar kind of efforts might be fruitful. Does anybody else want to identify areas where we should be looking at a specific project right now and trying to encourage activity similar to what Richard has successfully pulled together really in the last 9 months by working with the Prometheus community and bringing it out to the CNCF. And the most recent face-to-face, of course, involved others like InfluxDB and Google and Weaveworks. So what do people think about other values of asterisk here, if anything? The only thing we have at the moment is serverless, which is knocking on the door of some kind of cloud events. Yeah.
So I don't have anything in regard to specific projects, but one thing which, at least to me, seems to be missing in the whole ecosystem as of right now is something which actually maintains what the state of the whole system, or however your system looks, should look like. Basically, if you're familiar with the term CMDB, something where I can put in the data and the how my stuff should look. So there's etcd, which is really good at taking this information once it's been put into key value stores and just key value pairs, sorry, and just pushing it out to machines. But the thing is, there's no central brain which actually manages what services should exist and how many of X I should have, what IP addresses have I be assigned, how many data centers do I have. For some of this information, it lives at least partially in some of these sub-projects, but there's no central brain which sits in the middle and keeps all this information together and also can probably correlate better than distinct bits and pieces within my whole setup. I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense. I didn't have time to prepare an actual slide with problem statements.
That's okay. That's fine. Would anyone else like to comment? Because I don't want to get lost here if now is not the time.
Yeah, I had one suggestion. There seem to be an emerging set of cases where people want to do things very similar to what is happening in the CNCF around Kubernetes, but in non-traditional data center environments like edge computing and IoT and all those kind of things. Now, we do already have, groups of those people in the Linux Foundation, but I think there's a bit of a vacuum as to where exactly Kubernetes and the CNCF, what its approach to that space is, edge and IoT. Might be interesting to just explore that space a little.
Okay. I mean, it feels a little bit, it's sort of half in, half out because it's potentially containerized. But I'm not sure if it represents kind of dynamic infrastructure or microservices, for example. And I think that kind of thing is more of a good topic for dinner at the CNCF dinner times in Austin, perhaps, when we're all getting together face to face and just see where people sort of feel things are going. I'd be quite keen to make sure that Jim Zemlin had a chance to say no to things as well.
Yeah.
But yes, I hear you on that. Okay, so good. I'm going to declare an end to that section. Thank you very much, Richard. So let's wrap up quickly. We have a few more small items just to run through. Projects. So we haven't made any changes to the priorities and backlog. We have a notary vote that is almost closed. I believe, Chris, you've already notified people on the list that you're going to hold the vote open for a few more days.
Yep.
And we're landing an announcement in the not too distant future as shown on the slide.
Yep, it'll be next week.
We have some working group updates, not today though, which I think we can do another time. Then we have the dev stats, which is something I think Dan might like to spend a moment telling us about.
Yeah, I think Dan dropped off, but essentially we've been funding an effort to improve statistics collection within the Kubernetes project and being able to see kind of stats across SIGs, within SIGs, and so on. So we're asking folks to test drive devstats.k8s.io and kind of give us any feedback, but it's better than kind of the Liturgia stuff that we had, and we've been working closely with the Kubernetes team to ensure that this is something useful for them. So we're just trying to raise the feasibility of this work. Cool. Ready to move on, Alexis?
Yeah, that's good. Move on. And I think that just brings us to the standard reminders about the events coming up. I think the main news item here is watch out for Thanksgiving. We have a meeting that's moved from the 21st of November to the 14th. So we have two meetings in November the 7th and November the 14th. And I don't know, we have an agenda yet for the 14th, but we have Spiffy and STO knocking on the door for the 7th, and more information from serverless and events.
And on the 14th, we have Open Policy Agent and a readout from the storage working group scheduled.
Okay. I mean, I'm still really keen, Chris, that we start to get project feedback into the TOC, because even without the service desk in place, it's really, really important that we check on how projects are going.
Yep.
And in particular, I'd like to highlight, just as we wrap, that having listened to the OpenMetrics story from Richard and thought about tracing, we have a project called Open Tracing, and there are various things going on at Google that people are talking about in the community under the name Census, which has probably got something to do with this. And I've also heard, complaints, and there's been some negging on Twitter about some of the project governance in Open Tracing from people who obviously sound a little frustrated. Chris, I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
So it would be really good to make sure that things are happy and moving forward in that project, and also therefore in other projects as well, lest we find ourselves with a problem.
Yep, I got you. I think we do have open tracing representatives on the call today. So I think Yuri is here, but in general, having more of our projects actually on this call, I think is useful.
Cool. Alrighty. Well, in that case, thank you very much, everybody, for today, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.